We are doing Bash at the Beach 1995. One of the important shows insofar as it's the end of an era. Let's see what we're going out on, putting the setting sun on a glorious 10 years of WCW growing and growing. It's the TV champion Renegade versus the Slim Jim's challenge winner, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff.
Renegade.
Oh, hate the Renegade.
Now, I thought when he first I was like, well, look, Ultimate Warrior. He's the Ultimate Warrior.
Yeah.
But then he's somehow even worse than the Ultimate Warrior.
He is the single most blatant rip-off of something successful done between the major promotions in America.
Yeah.
He is also among the least successful. Imagine an Ultimate Warrior that's worse than the Ultimate Warrior.
Yeah.
They said it couldn't be done, Pete.
It's almost incredible.
His real name
He was bitten by a radioactive shit Ultimate Warrior.
He found a hypodermic needle in the Meadowlands Arena that had briefly been used to shoot up steroids by the Ultimate Warrior. His real name was Richard Wilson. I don't believe it.
I don't believe this.
He was a guy, he didn't have a great deal of luck in life,
No.
to be brutally frank. He had a bad childhood growing up in Georgia. He had an abusive stepfather. He worked as a male exotic dancer pre-wrestling. He went to be trained by Killer Kowalski. Killer Kowalski, among his most famous students were Triple H. But for some reason, Kowalski didn't bother to train him. So one of the other students at Kowalski's school trained Richard Wilson. And in 1992, he debuted as Rio, Lord of the Jungle. Basically, Tarzan. It had elements of his male exotic dancer sort of thing, which was tiny little speedos and sort of fronds everywhere.
Right.
So even those fronds were basically, people were looking at that and going, those fronds remind me, they're quite Ultimate Warrior-y, aren't they? So there's not a huge leap between people seeing what he was doing and then making him into this awful rip-off. His body set him apart from a lot of wrestlers in the 90s who weren't in the big leagues. I don't know whether he was a steroid user. I should imagine for the time and looking at his physique, he probably was.
Yeah.
He worked in the New England independent scene and he had a tryout with WWF in 1993. He was only by that point a year into his career. It's slightly amazing that they didn't take him, but if you think about it, 1993, that is when they were clamping down on steroids.
Yeah.
He was traditionally one of those guys who, had he come along in 1990, I think he definitely would have been put on the cards. He was signed by WCW in 1995, so in this year. And just before the uncensored pay-per-view, where Hogan was going up against Vader, Hogan promised he had an ultimate surprise to help him in his match. They then cut to a silhouette of a man with long hair and those arm tassels.
Yes.
And everyone was supposed to think, absolutely, that this was the Ultimate Warrior.
Why would you do that?
I mean... WCW makes some booking decisions that are so stupid. This could only be a thing where people would turn around and go, you fucking ripped us off. What a bait and switch. It wasn't the Ultimate Warrior. It was this. Hogan introduced him as the man that's going to bring hulkamania into the 21st century. And out he came, the Renegade. The real problem as well with the Renegade is not just that he's a bad ripoff. He's also a pitiful wrestler. I mean, he really, really is bad. He tried to use largely the same moveset as the Ultimate Warrior. They had the sort of similar sounding theme. It's a bit like a create a wrestler that you'd make in the old days before you could just click and download them off the server and people had spent hours doing them and they were good. Renegade always makes me think of when you used to go into like post offices in 2000, they'd have a carousel of toys and quite often there'd be some knockoff wrestlers and they'd look a bit like Kevin Nash and a bit like Scott Hall.
Yeah.
And he's really like that post office carousel bootleg toy of the Ultimate Warrior. Within 2 months of his debut, I mean, I can't get over from the word go how unpopular he was, how angry he made people just seeing him. He had beaten Arn Anderson for the TV title, a real fuck you to Arn Anderson, one of the great wrestlers of the 80s who was still working at a really top level in the early 90s. It just basically told you that if you used to like what WCW had been pre-1994, then it was being swept away.
Yeah.
And this was what you were getting. You were getting rip-offs that could not wrestle, and they would beat the people that you liked. He is a stupid, noisy shit. And so here we are. Jimmy Hart is his manager. Jimmy Hart at this time is the manager of Hulk Hogan, so there was a sense of going, he is the anointed one. I would sort of argue, I don't think having Jimmy Hart has ever made anyone like a wrestler more.
Yeah, he's just there, isn't he, I suppose?
He's
really very
is.
Successful, but just because of hit rate.
Yeah.
It's like a blunderbuss. You're going to hit something, aren't you?
Yeah, completely. And he starts this off in an interview, and he's holding up a magazine. And he's like, oh, the magazines are talking about it, Daddy. Like that. And it's obviously WCW magazine.
Yeah. Oh, the magazine.
But you're on television. And television is... Don't show off being in a magazine on TV. You know...
It's that veneer of respectability, though.
Yeah.
It's on the rougeau. You've by-rolled that in.
We're on TV, but wait till there's an email come in from someone that says he loves him. You know, TV is bigger than all of this.
Hey, you know what? This fan mail's for the Renegade. Can you believe this? Ever since Uncensored, this guy's getting a ton of fan mail. You know, everybody wants to know, hey, what's he all about? What's the deal between him and the Huckster? Well, you came to the right place because Jimmy Hart, the mouth of the South, I'm going to tell you all about the Renegade. No, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to show you.
Paul Orndorff is his opponent, and rightly, Paul Orndorff is not happy about having to work with the Renegade.
Yeah.
He comes out legitimately furious. It works wonders for Orndorff, because Orndorff is one of those guys, he's there in the 80s, he's headlined with Hulk Hogan, he's now second on the card, he's angry about it. He always felt with Hogan that he should have gone over.
Right.
He thought he should be the WWF champion, he thought he would have been a bigger champion than Hogan.
Right.
So he's stuck in the second match against the Renegade, a guy who's been wrestling for 3 years and hasn't picked up any skills, and he's on a beach.
And he's on a beach, it's hot, he's 45. He's just got a pile driver.
He comes down and he's winding up the fans so well, because he is just like, I am going to shine in this. I am not going to let the Renegade drag me down to his level. And he does an amazing job. As the Renegade comes in, the one thing you do notice for the first time is the platform, the raised platform that the ring is on. So there's the ring, then there's a sort of second bigger ring without ropes, and then there's the floor. And I did look at that and I thought, I mean, it was only like a year before that Rick Rude broke his back on something that was much smaller.
Yeah.
And I like the fact they've done that and they've just gone, do you know what this looks like? It looks like a more dangerous version of the thing that, you know, ended Rick Rude's career. Everyone just goes, yeah, great. No, how much was it? Was it cheap? Yeah, it was cheap.
It was really cheap.
Brilliant.
It'll splinter.
Yeah. Orndorff does all the work in this match as well. I mean, he does all of the offence. He then takes all of the bumps. The whole thing is just about Paul Orndorff. He gets all of the boos, and as the match goes on, he begins to get the cheers. I think if there's a moment where you see a flawed experiment is coming off the rails, it's this match. And this is the match where WCW really, they can no longer keep up this pretense.
Yeah.
In a weird way, because they're also in front of a load of people who aren't wrestling fans. And these people see through it. And these people feel ripped off. And these people begin going, I'm going to cheer the man who is obviously the bad guy over the one that I'm supposed to like.
Yeah.
I love it when that happens. I love it when the crowd just go, no, this is going to stop now. Renegade does these 2 drop kicks as well in it. And you've never seen anyone do a worse drop kick. He sort of jumps upright and then tries to, when he's in the air, he tries to make his body go horizontal.
He's seen, you know, the video game Renegade or Target Renegade or Double Dragon, where the Lee brothers jump in the air and then do a kick, and somehow you hit someone.
A drop kick, you have to...
The other person has to eat, effectively.
Exactly.
He has to want to eat it.
You either have to be like in motion so that you can sort of jump up and your feet are in front of you and that's all one movement, or you have to jump up and you have to be good at this, basically
Float.
but the key thing is what my feet are doing. Whereas he goes, I'll get to my apex, get to the very top I can, then I'll start bringing the legs up. Right? It's so pitiful. Orndorff, there's a bit where he pulls him out of the ring by his trunks. He just throws him through the ropes. And that's the moment where the crowd, they don't cheer, but they let out an appreciative noise. They sort of go, oh, yeah. Like that.
Renegade with a power slam. And he throws Renegade on the outside.
And that's the moment where it turns. There's a terrible ending on this as well. Renegade does a back suplex. He covers Paul Orndorff. Orndorff puts his shoulder up at 3, and the referee continues to count. That is a perfect example as well to cut off the legs of someone you're trying to get over.
Yeah.
Where you just go, he can't even beat him fair and square.
Yeah.
You know, this guy's supposed to be the next hero. He's the man who's taking hulkamania into the 21st century. You know, he can't even beat Paul Orndorff fair and square.
He's been programmed by Jimmy Hart to terminate on sight.
Yes.
He's a renegade.
Renegade World Television Champ, big task ahead of you.
Jimmy Hart has programmed me to TOS terminate on sight!
You got this guy tuned up, I'll tell you.
He is, Renegade. He's a renegade against good professional wrestling. He is in a world of his own where they go, do you want to do professional wrestling well? And he goes, I don't have time for that. I'm going to do my own thing, daddy. When Orndorff then attacks him at the end, the crowd love it. They really cheer. Orndorff pile drives him, and there is a huge pop. It's the biggest pop on the show so far. They love the fact that Renegade has been knocked onto his head, but then Renegade makes an immediate comeback. The noise isn't quite jeering. There is no cheering. It's just, it's the worst thing. It's not even a reaction where you go, let's turn this guy heel. You just go, they do not care. They do not care for this guy. Within a couple of months, Renegade would lose the TV title to Diamond Dallas Page, and then Jimmy Hart turned on him. He threw water in his face, saying, "You're not a renegade. You're just plain old Rick, a nobody. You're nothing." You'll be surprised to hear that didn't get him over. Didn't help him anyway. He remained with WCW until 1998, just not really being used in any capacity. An amazing sort of 3 years where you just don't do anything. But he was fired from WCW eventually. He then worked as a bouncer, and he was training to be a farrier. A farrier is someone who works in equine horse hoof care. So that was his new
strange
thing. Yeah, he was a renegade though, so he didn't use traditional horse tools. You know, he used ones he'd made out of flotsam.
He just waved a chisel around and hoped that it would go somewhere near the horse.
He put his hands together, say namaste, and then he'd ask for his money. But he did sadly develop severe depression, largely because of the release and his financial situation. Having had 4 years in WCW, he was probably making 6 figures comfortably every year. No other wrestling companies showed any interest in him after he was fired. In February 1999, at the age of 33, he would die of a self-inflicted gunshot wound in his own home. Police said he'd been arguing with his girlfriend who had lived with him, and then during the middle of the argument, he just pulled out a .38 pistol and he shot himself through the head with it. Horrible. It follows on. I'm going to just now do a massive gear change because this is the bit where Bobby Heenan says the best thing he's ever said.
Right.
They're talking about something, and Tony Schiavone says, at the risk of being obvious, and he says something, and Bobby Heenan sort of goes, "Oh yeah, never heard that before." And there's a pause, and Heenan just says to him, "Hey, Schiavone, why did the chicken cross the road?" And Tony Schiavone says, "Well, to get to the other side." And Bobby Heenan says, "You can't stop Schiavone."
So he drops it. As the old cliche goes, like a bad habit. Do you like that one?
Yeah, I like that one. First time I've ever heard that.
The Renegade with so much.
Why'd the chicken cross the street?
Get to the other side. Thank you.
You can't stump Schiavone.
He says it so brilliantly. It's so good to have someone say something so dull. Oh, can't stop Schiavone. Love it. Absolutely adored it.